Have you ever felt that sharp, twisting pain in your knee? That instant uh-oh moment where you just know something went wrong? Well, for hundreds of thousands of people every single year, that feeling ends with a diagnosis, a torn meniscus. Now, for decades, the fix was pretty straightforward, but the way we think about treating this vital piece of the knee is going through an absolutely radical change. All right, so here's what we're going to cover. First, we'll get into the basics of what the meniscus is and why you should care about it. Then, we'll unpack the classic, tough choice that surgeons and patients have faced for years. After that, we'll look at a game-changing study that gives a clear verdict. And finally, we'll dive into the super exciting future of injections and even regenerating your own meniscus. So to really understand this whole problem, we first have to give some credit to the unsung hero of the story, the meniscus itself. It's easily one of the most important and honestly most underappreciated parts of our entire knee. So what is it? Just think of the meniscus as your knee's personal built-in shock absorber. You actually have two of them in each knee. They're these tough, rubbery, C-shaped bits of cartilage that sit right between your thigh bone and your shin bone, creating this perfect cushion so everything moves smoothly. And this thing is an absolute workhorse. I mean, get this. Just from walking, it's absorbing about half of the entire load going through your knee joint. It provides stability, keeps things lubricated, and, this is the big one, it protects the precious cartilage on the ends of your bones. If you lose your meniscus, you are punching a fast-track ticket to bone-on-bone arthritis. It's that important. And that brings us right to the heart of the conflict, because when you tear your meniscus, especially as you get older, you and your doctor have been stuck between a rock and a hard place, facing a really tough choice with no perfect answer. And here's the question. Do you try to stitch that tear back together, or do you just trim out the damaged floppy part? For a long, long time, especially for anyone over, say, 40 or 50, just removing it was the standard procedure. But that whole way of thinking is now being seriously challenged. So here's the classic trade-off. On one side, you have the partial meniscectomy. That's the removal. The upside, a much quicker recovery. You're back on your feet way faster. The huge, massive downside, you've just permanently thrown out that critical shock absorber, which dramatically increases your risk for arthritis later on. On the other side, you've got the repair, where a surgeon actually sutures the tissue. This is great because it saves your knee's anatomy, but the rehab is a beast. It's way longer. And there's always been this big worry. Will older tissue even heal properly? So, what's the right call? Which path actually leads to a better life for the patient? Well, to answer that, we're going to look at a landmark study from the world-renowned Mayo Clinic that put these two surgeries head-to-head in patients over 60. And wow, this chart tells you pretty much everything you need to know. The researchers didn't just look at MRIs, they asked the patients a simple question. How does your knee feel? How well does it work? And the difference is just staggering. The bar on the left is for the repair group, on the right is the removal group. Higher is better, and, well, it's not even a contest. Let's look at the actual numbers, because they're wild. You don't have to know what all these acronyms mean, IKDC, Qs, just know they're standard ways to measure knee health. And on every single one, the repair group reported way less pain and much better function. Look at that Q score, 86.6 versus 61.7. That's not just a number on a chart. That's the difference between being active and wincing every time you go up the stairs. It's a huge deal for quality of life. The study's conclusion was totally unambiguous. And here's the key insight. For years, the old school thinking was to just remove torn menisci in older patients because everyone just assumed the tissue wouldn't heal. This study basically took that old idea and turned it on its head, proving that even in people over 60, saving the meniscus leads to a much, much better result from the patient's point of view. But, and this is a big but, there's a catch. Even though the successful repairs were amazing, about 22% of them actually failed. So for about 1 in every 5 patients, the repair just didn't hold, and yep, they needed another surgery. That's the risk you run. Okay, but what about the quote-unquote safer option of just removing the piece? Well, that wasn't a magic bullet either. It turns out 18% of those patients ended up needing a full-blown total knee replacement just a few years later. So you see the dilemma, right? Neither choice is perfect, and that created this huge motivation to find a better way. So this exact problem, the risk of a repair failing versus the long-term damage of removal, is what really pushed the medical world to look for a third option. They started asking, what if the choice isn't just between two imperfect surgeries? What if we could get the meniscus to heal itself without an operation? And that's the new goal. We're shifting away from a purely mechanical mindset, cutting and sewing, and we're moving toward a biological one. The goal is simple, but it's profound. Help the body heal itself from the inside out. And this is where this amazing field called orthobiologics comes into play. The basic idea is to take your body's own natural healing powers and just give them a turbo boost. Take PRP, for example. Doctors take a small bit of your own blood, spin it down in a centrifuge to get this super concentrated liquid gold full of platelets, and then they inject it right into the tear. Those platelets are packed with growth factors, which are basically little signals that tell your body, hey, we need to repair some tissue right here. And this isn't some far-off futuristic concept. A major review of all the clinical data in 2023 came to the conclusion that, yes, orthobiologics could be a new, effective way to treat these tears. The science is still evolving for sure, but it is an incredibly promising path forward. But what if we could go even one step further? What if we could do more than just encourage a tear to heal? What if we could actually replace the lost tissue by growing a brand new piece of meniscus right inside your knee? Now we're talking about the real holy grail of regenerative medicine. Instead of just patching up the damage, what if you could truly reverse it? And that leads us to the idea of a regenerative implant. Let me just walk you through how this works, using a device called RejuvaKnee as an example. So first, a surgeon implants this tiny, porous scaffold made of collagen, think of it like a trellis you'd use for a climbing plant, right into the damaged spot. Then, over the next few months, your body's own cells find the scaffold and start growing all over it, building new meniscus tissue. And the coolest part? The scaffold itself just slowly dissolves and gets absorbed by your body, leaving behind only new, living tissue that you grew yourself. So is this a big deal? You better believe it. We're talking about over 1 million meniscectomies, the removal surgery, every year in the US alone. The potential market for something that can regrow tissue instead is estimated to be nearly $1 billion. And that number, it's not just about business. It's a reflection of the massive, massive need for a better solution. So this all brings us to one final, really fascinating question. For decades, the story of a damaged joint has been about managing it and then eventually replacing it. But we're seeing this incredible evolution from choosing to repair instead of remove, to using injections to promote healing, and now to implanting scaffolds to actually regrow tissue. The goal is no longer just cutting out the problem. It's about regenerating the solution. It really makes you wonder, are we entering an era where we stop replacing our joints and start regrowing them instead?